The restaurant was the kind of place where the menus had no prices. Not because the food was free, but because the people who ate there were not supposed to need to ask. It occupied the top floor of a building in the financial district, with windows that looked out over the city in every direction, and a silence between tables that cost as much as anything on the menu. The kind of silence that communicates without saying so, that whatever is happening at your table is not happening at anyone else's table, and that this is the arrangement, and the arrangement suits everyone. It did not suit what happened on a Thursday evening in October. Her name was Diane Marsh, 52 years old, chief executive of a pharmaceutical distribution company for 11 years, which meant 11 years of being correct, decisive and unapologetic, and increasingly poor at the one thing none of those three leaves room for: uncertainty. She arrived 15 minutes late, which was unusual, and had assembled from the slow car and the unnecessary elevator stops the particular mood of a person who has decided the evening owes her something and intends to collect. The waiter's name was Daniel, 26 years old, 8 months at this restaurant, funding the final year of a graduate program in public health through shifts that ran until close and left him home at 1 in the morning with the tiredness of someone who has been performing composure for 7 hours. He was good at his job. He was also managing a table of 6 with a dietary complication that had required 2 trips to the kitchen, and he was 3 minutes late with Diane's appetizer. 3 minutes. Diane looked at the plate and then at Daniel and said, at a volume just below a scene, that this was unacceptable, that she came to this restaurant specifically because it did not make her wait, that if she had wanted to wait, she would have eaten somewhere honest about it. Daniel said he apologized. He said it clearly and without qualification, the way people say things when they have been trained to say them, and mean them and move on. Diane was not finished. She said an apology was not the same as competence, that she had a meeting in 40 minutes and had communicated this when making the reservation and was beginning to wonder whether such things were noted and promptly forgotten. She said this at a volume that had crossed from calibrated to simply audible, and the nearest tables received it the way people receive things they were not meant to hear. Daniel stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing. He had learned in 8 months that this was the correct response, and he was correct about that, and it cost him something every time. At the adjacent table, an elderly man set down his fork. He had been there when Diane arrived, perhaps 80, slight, in a plain, dark jacket, the jacket of a man who had stopped thinking about what his jacket communicated some years ago. Dining alone, eating slowly, reading a small book placed beside his water glass. He had not looked up when Diane sat down, and had not looked up during the first part of what she said. He looked up now. He set his fork down on the plate with a care that was audible only because the room had gone very quiet. He folded the corner of his page. He placed the book beside his glass. He put both hands flat on the table, and then he stood up. Before we continue, if you believe that dignity is not a function of title or table, and that the right word at the right moment can change the temperature of a room, please like this video, subscribe to The Story Within, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people today. He did not raise his voice. He did not move toward Diane's table. He simply stood at his own table and spoke in the register of a man who has spent 50 years in rooms where what you say and how you say it are the only tools available, and has become, through that half-century, very precise with both. He said, I have been eating in this restaurant for many years. I have been served by a great number of people in that time. I have never once been given reason to speak to any of them the way you have just spoken to this young man. Diane looked at him. The room looked at him. He said, he is 3 minutes late with a plate of food. You are speaking to him as though he has done something that requires accounting for. He has not. He is doing his job in a room that is, by any observable measure, full. Whatever is happening at your table this evening, it did not begin with him, and whatever is happening at your table this evening, he is not the appropriate place for it to arrive. He picked up his fork. He sat down. He returned to his food. The room remained quiet for a moment in the way rooms remain quiet when something has been said that does not immediately resolve into the ordinary texture of an evening. Then gradually it did. Cutlery moved. conversation resumed. The particular silence of the restaurant reasserted itself, though it was a different silence now, the kind that follows something rather than precedes it. Diane Marsh did not say anything. She looked at the elderly man's back. She looked at Daniel, who had not moved. She looked at her plate. She said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Daniel said, "Thank you." He said it the way he said the apology, clearly and without qualification. Then he went back to his other table. "Before we go further, the story within wants you to know who the old man was and what had made him into the person who stood up. His name was Walter Osei, 81 years old, 34 years on the bench of the state's Second Circuit Court. He had learned in that time that the quality most required for deciding things well was not intelligence or experience, but the willingness to be uncomfortable in the service of what was correct. He had retired 7 years ago, was not famous outside the legal community, and ate at this restaurant on the third Thursday of each month, because his late wife had loved it, and continuing to come felt like a form of fidelity that required no explanation. But Walter Osei had not arrived at 81 with this quality intact by accident. There was Judge Carmichael, who had taken Walter on as a clerk at 25 and said, in his first week, "The most important thing a person in authority can do is notice when that authority is being used to diminish rather than serve, and stop. You will see it constantly. The question is whether you decide it is not your business." Walter had written it down. He still had it. There was Mrs. Paulette, who had run the diner near the courthouse where Walter ate for 20 years, and who had modeled daily the dignity of a person who serves others without becoming less than them, who had taught him, without meaning to, that service is not a hierarchy but an exchange, and that everyone in an exchange deserves to leave it intact. There was his wife Eleanor, who had told him near the end that what she loved most about him was that he never calculated whether something was worth the effort before doing it. "Most people are always deciding," she said. "You just go." He was that Thursday in October going. None of these people were in that restaurant. All of them were. Diane Marsh finished her meal. She was not, in the end, late for her meeting. She sat with what had happened in the way that people sit with things that have landed precisely where they needed to land, which is to say with difficulty and without resolution, and with the specific discomfort of someone who has been shown something true about themselves in public. She thought about Daniel, about the word competence and how she had used it, about the table of 6 she had not noticed, the dietary complication, the graduate program she did not know existed, the one in the morning he arrived home, the tiredness he was carrying that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a life she had not considered before speaking. She left a tip that was, by any standard, excessive. She did not feel that it resolved anything. She did not intend it to resolve anything. It was simply the only instrument she had available at the end of a meal, and she used it because not using it felt worse. She did not speak to Walter Osei before leaving. She thought about it. She stood near the elevator for a moment, looking back at the room and at the old man still sitting with his book and his remaining glass of water, and she thought about walking back and saying something. She decided that whatever she might say would be more for herself than for him, and that he did not need it, and that the better thing was to carry it herself and see what she did with it. She thought about it for 3 weeks. On a Tuesday in November, she called the restaurant, explained that she owed the waiter an apology more substantial than what she had given him at the table, and asked for his name. The manager gave it. She wrote a letter on paper, 3 drafts, because she kept finding she was writing toward her own absolution rather than toward him, and started again each time she noticed. The final version said, in part, that she had spoken to him in a way that was wrong by any measure she respected, and that the fact that she had been having a difficult evening was not a mitigating circumstance, but simply the explanation for how she had arrived at a behavior she was not otherwise in the habit of and did not intend to return to. It said that she understood he had been managing a room full of people, and that she had added to that without warrant. It said that his composure in receiving what she said had been more professional than anything she had managed that evening. She mailed it to the restaurant with a note asking them to pass it along. Daniel received it on a Friday. He read it twice in the break room before his shift. He did not show it to anyone. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and went out to the floor. Walter Osei never knew any of this. He came back the following third Thursday, ordered what he always ordered, read his book, went home. He did not think of himself as having done something significant. He thought of himself as having done what the situation required, which, to him, was the same as doing nothing in particular, which is perhaps exactly the point. Never wait for someone else to say the thing the room needs to hear. Never assume that because no one else has stood up, standing up is not available to you. And never mistake composure for acceptance. The young man who stood still and absorbed what was said to him was not agreeing to it. He was simply waiting, as people who know their own worth always wait for the room to catch up. Welcome to the story within. We are so glad you are here.